Lindsay Miles is an author, a creator, and an all around inspirational educator on the subject of zero waste living, less waste living, clutter free living, and sustainable living. In this episode, Alison asks Lindsay some questions about Lindsay's experience with getting out of the supermarkets and learning to shop in alternate routes. This is a really fun episode. I wasn't here for it, but I was excited to listen to the replay, and I think you'll enjoy it too. We look forward to hearing about your experiences with walking out of the supermarket and learning to shop from your local farms. And I'm really excited about the collective impact that all of us will have on the healthy and positive stewardship of our planet just by quitting supermarkets.
So I'm here with Lindsay Miles from Treading My Own Path, and I found Lindsay via her blog post about quitting supermarkets when I was really interested in quitting supermarkets. And I thought it'd be wonderful to have her come share with us her own experience and give us some tips, because I know she's been at it for a long time. So hi, Lindsay. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All the way from Australia.
Via England.
Yeah, exactly. So first of all, tell us how long ago you quit supermarkets and why you chose to do that.
Okay, so my kind of sustainability journey, if you want to call it that, kind of started in 2012. And what actually happened was I decided that I was going to try and quit plastic. So I did this challenge to try and quit plastic for the month. And I remember the first time, I went to the supermarket and I'm trying to buy stuff without plastic. So you go to the fruit and veg aisle, and then you go to the deli counter, the fish counter, the meat counter, the cheese counter, the bakery. And then you go to maybe some of the aisles and there's a few things in tins and glass jars, and kind of realized that, I guess, a couple of things. First of all, there wasn't much choice at the supermarket. Considering supermarkets have 40,000 items for sale, once you try and actually remove the plastic and the packaging, there's not that many. And a lot of that stuff, a lot of those 40,000 items are actually processed junk, which I thought that I ate quite healthily. But when I started kind of stripping it back and not buying the packaging and realizing that the less processed something is, the more likely you can get it without packaging, the more I guess I kind of realized that supermarkets weren't actually that useful. So I guess I went to the supermarket and I bought, toilet paper, and I could get toilet paper and wrapped in paper. And bananas and mushrooms and bread rolls and jar of olives and pasta in a box. And then the next time I went back, I got bananas and bread and mushrooms and olives and it was kind of like, I'm going to die of malnutrition if I keep shopping at the supermarket. Yeah. And so I guess then I was like, okay, what other options are there? And so farmers markets was one, veggie box deliveries was one, bulk stores where you can go and take your own containers and fill up pasta, rice, all the sort of dry goods, lentils, all of that sort of thing. So basically, slowly, I started looking for other alternatives to where I could buy things. And then when I wrote that blog post, basically I kind of realized one day that I wasn't really going to the supermarket anymore. So it wasn't that I actually had this big decision, I'm quitting supermarkets. It was more that I just started trying to find alternatives to the things I wanted to buy. And I kind of realized that the supermarkets weren't actually the best option. They're full of processed and overpackaged stuff. So that was kind of how I, quit them.
So it sounds like it was a kind of an education on something that you didn't really notice before because you weren't bothered about the plastic. Plastic kind of prompted you to, and you saw so much more when you tried to change it.
Yeah, I mean, I was bothered about the plastic. I think we're all bothered about the plastic, but I just didn't realize that I could do something about it. I'd see all this plastic and I'd be like, oh, it's ridiculous that the shops have all of this plastic. But then I'd buy it, and it never occurred to me that I was part of the problem and I could be part of the solution. And, one of the things that I'm really lucky is that I have access to really good farmers markets. I've got access to really good grocery stores, like in kind of the city where I live. I've got, there's lots of bulk stores where you can buy things. So it was quite easy for me, like not fast, but easy for me to find alternatives that wasn't taking up. Because I think people think you go to the supermarket because it's convenient. And if you start going to the bulk store and the bakery and the farmers market, suddenly you're spending, 25 hours a week grocery shopping and you have to quit your job or whatever. And it wasn't actually like that, but it was about kind of creating a new routine. So, going to the farmer's market that also had a bakery, or figuring out that, the bulk store that sold olive oil was near the post office, or, whatever it is. So it kind of probably took, I reckon it took maybe 6 months. And also just being able to buy the right amount of stuff, because, you buy things in packets and you kind of know how much 2 tins of this and 2 packets of that.
Yeah.
And when you're buying it fresh, how long does it last, and how long does it last in the fridge or in the cupboard, and how long does it last because you cook it, whatever speed you cook it. So there was a lot of kind of work around figuring out the routine. And now, when I say, I quit the supermarket, I don't really believe in absolutes. So I do still go into the supermarket. I find my grocery store, the onions are always rotten in the middle. It drives me nuts. I don't know why, they just don't store. So generally I'll get onions from the supermarket. So I kind of treat it like my emergency, kind of store, rather than, whereas most people will use the supermarket as their main store, and then the convenience store is their emergency store. So I've kind of reversed it. So
I think what you're saying about routine is really important, because what you're saying is, it's not a kind of hard and fast rule that you're never going to step in a supermarket again, but you've got into the habit of it being the emergency rather than the opposite being the emergency, which is
exactly
important.
And now I go into the supermarket, and when I first used to go there, I knew where everything was. So you could, you take your trolley and you kind of on autopilot, and you get to the checkout and your trolley's full with all of the things that you want, and you're like, oh. Whereas now I go in and there's all the lights and there's all the people, and I love this bewildered, what do they say, rabbit in the headlights, and I'm like, my God, where will I find the things?
We don't realise that. I have experienced that, in that, because I don't go in supermarkets, from maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago was the last time I went in one. And before, I never even noticed that they had these blaring lights and there was all these beeping everywhere. And now when I go in one, I'm like, oh, the lights, my eyes feel funny, and there's all people. And it makes you realise, having been away from it, what an unnatural environment they are.
Yeah, and they're very overwhelming. So, you want to buy some strawberry jam. So you go to the aisle and then there's 29 types of strawberry jam. And you're like, do I need a big one? Or, oh, no, I need sugar, or this brand. And then that one's on sale. But I don't know. And, and obviously, our brains can't deal with that kind of decision making. So usually when we go to the supermarket, we are kind of on autopilot. Yeah. And kind of unlocking yourself from that, and then going, oh, I have to make a decision about which jam, and then I have to make a decision about which olives, and then I have whereas you go to the farmer's market, or you go to a bulk store, or you go to an independent grocer, and they've only got 2 types of jam, and they've only got 1 type of tomato, or whatever it is. And so I found that not shopping at supermarkets was much more kind of relaxing. But like I said, I kind of think I don't want to be I'm not going to supermarkets under any for any reason whatsoever, because actually when I wrote the original blog post, I lived somewhere where it was very easy for me to go to box stores and stuff, and it still is. I've moved since, and it's still easy, but my husband drives literally past the supermarket to and from work every single day, and it's next to the library, and it's next to the bulk store. So which is why now, if we need onions, I'm not going to go, I'm going to go to the library, go to the bulk store, and then drive 15 kilometers just to prove a point, because that's just more work and more hassle. But I guess so with all of this COVID stuff, where I don't know if it happened in Italy, but I know in England and I know in Australia, aisles were empty. Aisles in Australia now are currently empty in the supermarkets. But if I go to the farmer's market, the independent grocery store, the bulk store, they haven't run out of anything, because they don't have these massive, complicated supply chains where things get taken to a central point and then they're shipped somewhere else and then they're back. So for me, with all of this COVID stuff, it's easy for me to say, you know what, I just won't go to the supermarket. I'll just go to the other places. And so I haven't really noticed this kind of chaos that everyone else had, which was really kind of reassuring, I think.
Yeah,
when everything else was so chaotic.
Yeah, it's easy to feel ungrounded by everything that's going on around you in a situation like we've had the last 18 months. And so having that not be in your life is a benefit to kind of mental health and relationships and how you show up in the world. I agree with you.
Yeah, it's one less thing to worry about.
I wanted to pick up on something more you said about routine, which was people think that it's the time, that it's going to take much more time if they don't go to the supermarket. But actually, you said it's just really routine that is changing. And once you were able to sort out, oh, okay, I'm going to go here, here, and here, that it didn't take this kind of massive extra time. And I think a lot of people are scared to make changes because, you know, it's difficult to disrupt a routine. You know, we have routines for a reason. They're easy for us. But I think it's wonderful that you'd share that actually once you have sorted that routine, it is not any harder. It does not take, you know, tons more time. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, well, I'd say, I mean, that's obviously true for me. It's not necessarily true for everyone. Like, you know, if your nearest bulk store is an hour's drive away or whatever. But then the other thing that I think is kind of important to remember is, like, and it's kind of like this thing I said before about absolutes. Like, it's not, you either quit the supermarket and you never go there, or you do everything there. Like, the way that I kind of approached it, and the way that actually we generally create new habits, is not by thinking, I'm quitting the supermarket, I've got to find a solution for everything. It's kind of thinking, I've got to figure out a different way to buy olives, or a different way to buy milk, or a different way to buy tomatoes or whatever, and kind of tackle things one thing at a time. So it might be that you live an hour from the bulk store and you can go to a bulk store once every 2 months and you stock up, and then in the meantime maybe you have to go to the supermarket. But, you know, everything we do to kind of unattach ourselves from these kind of they're really fragile supply chains. I think with COVID we've really seen how fragile this kind of system can be, and how kind of we just get sucked into it. So, you know, if you can't do it all the time because, you know, you've got 5 children, or because the bulk store's an hour away or whatever, then that doesn't mean you can't do it at all. You can maybe, you know, maybe the kids' football club is next to a really good bakery, or maybe you work near a grocer or whatever. So you can fit bits in. You don't have to do everything.
Yeah.
And kind of routines will always change. You know, people get busier, new places open, kids get older, you know, all of these things. So the other thing is, if you can't do it right now, doesn't mean you won't be able to do it in 6 months. It doesn't mean you can't do half of it. Doesn't mean in a year you can't revisit it. It doesn't mean in 2 years a bulk store is going to open next door to your house, you know. So we've kind of got to remember that whatever our situation is now, it's not stuck in time. So we can do what we can now, but we'll always be able to kind of tweak things, and, you know, maybe we have to take a step back for now, but the opportunity is always going to be there to kind of try and do better, I think.
Yeah, wonderful. What was the most difficult thing for you to make that journey? You said it took about 6 months. What was the hardest change in that process?
I guess hardest in terms, there's one thing that I guess, well, the thing is, right, thinking about kind of change and thinking about routines, and you have to, it's really hard when you're talking about changing habits. You can't talk about kind of big abstract ideas like quitting the supermarket or not using plastic, because it's kind of meaningless in terms of habits. Like, what does that mean? You've got to break it down. And so kind of with the supermarket, it's like literally kind of on a tiny level going, where can I get bread without plastic, or where can I get olives that isn't the supermarket, or whatever it is. And so in terms of, I guess, difficulty, it tends to be the things that you can't buy outside the supermarket. And I think for me, there wasn't really much that I couldn't buy outside the supermarket. Probably the one thing that I struggle with is bars of chocolate. Like, the grocery store I sell doesn't really have any, and the bulk store has a lot, but it's kind of not dark enough. And I realize this is a very first world problem, but I really like chocolate, and I don't really want to give it up. I don't want to give it up. And, you know, we're all allowed kind of luxuries in life, and a bar of dark chocolate is kind of mine. And so, you know, sometimes we do have these little exceptions. And so I'll go to the bulk store and I'll get their chocolate. But sometimes, and I'll go to the grocery store and like the independent store and get what they've got. But, you know, sometimes I will sneak into the supermarket and just buy a bar of my favorite, which isn't sold anywhere else. So sometimes it's just the thing. And other things like blueberries and strawberries, which come in plastic. Like, I just decided when I did this challenge just to give them up. Like, if I can't buy them without plastic, I just won't eat them. And that was fine. But chocolate isn't the same. I can't, for some reason, blueberries, strawberries were fine. Chocolate is not. And so, you know, and I think everyone's got that. There'll be things that you're like, oh, it doesn't really matter. Like, I could buy bread rolls instead of a loaf and kind of, you know, get them from the bakery or avoid the packaging. But sometimes we get things and we're like, I'm just not. And so I think that's the difficult thing. Like, when you can't find an alternative. And you can't give stuff up. And, you know, whether you personally want to give something up, you know, it's kind of your choice. And, you know, I always think when people talk about sustainability. You know, the most sustainable thing would be growing everything and drinking rainwater and not drinking anything. No one's doing that. I mean, some people are doing that, but people who live in cities are not doing that. And so we've kind of just got to give ourselves a break, I think. And if we do it 90% or 95% or 80% or 70%, you know, it's still better than 0%. So
yeah, and what you said right back at the beginning was, you know, you thought initially that you couldn't do anything about plastic use, but if what you're saying, you know, if everyone did it 70%, oh my gosh, the difference that would make.
Yes, the other thing actually, which kind of haven't talked about, but one of the other things when I started giving up plastic, like obviously, well, not obviously, but I realized that I started to buy different things, and it wasn't necessarily deliberate. But for example, like it was easy to buy cauliflowers plastic free. It was really hard to buy cherry tomatoes plastic free. And so I just started, and it was, I could buy big ones, but not cherry tomatoes. And so I just realized I was buying slightly different things. And so then I had to learn slightly different recipes, which wasn't something I really thought about, but I kind of, when I looked back, you know, 6 months or a year later, I was like, oh, I always make these things and I never make those things anymore. So that was
interesting.
Yeah, but I guess that's another thing. Like if you're cooking stuff from scratch, like just kind of learning new recipes and figuring out how to use things. Like if you're going to buy a whole pumpkin or a whole watermelon rather than a quarter wrapped in plastic, you know, you've got to figure out how to use it up before it goes bad. So it's not so much difficult, but I think you need a bit of bandwidth to, you know, start to learn how to use things or
and that's why it's good to take your time with it, so you can take those things on board and skill up in some areas for sure.
Yeah, and that was also a cost thing. Like if it's cheaper to buy, you know, sometimes I generally find my bulk store and my independent grocery store are cheaper than the supermarket. I'm sure they're not cheaper for absolutely everything, but you basically, for me, what I did was I have a budget for groceries overall. So I don't go in and go, oh, the mushrooms in the supermarket are $10 and the mushrooms in the independent store are $12. Oh, I'm paying more. I kind of go, I've got this much money to spend. Some things will be more, some things will be less. As long as overall I'm spending the same, then it's fine. And I think people can get really fixated on, oh, I bought some cheese and it was $5 more than the cheese at the supermarket. And that, you know, that might be a problem if everything's like that. But actually, if you're saving money on the tomatoes and the bread and the broccoli, then it doesn't actually matter. So, you know, and also one other thing just to mention when you're starting is, like I remember someone doing the plastic free challenge, like went to some fancy deli to buy cheese and, you know, ended up spending like $100 on what she would normally spend, you know, $10 on, and was like, oh my God. And, you know, you do have these things where you don't realize how much something costs or how big something is, or, you know, sometimes, like, for example, tea, like when you see loose tea, it'll have a really expensive price. It will be, you know, $100 a kilo. And you go, oh my God, that's so expensive. Yeah. But when you buy it, you realize it doesn't actually weigh anything. So you buy a big jar of tea and it costs you $4 and it's the same as if you bought a packet of tea bags kind of thing. But sometimes you don't know, and, you know, you'll go to the till and you'll buy something and you're like, $25. That's a lot. And, you know, you do make a few mistakes along the way, but you just have to, but it's not like you blow out your whole bill every week. You kind of learn and go, oh, okay, that's expensive, or oh, cheese actually is really heavy, or whatever it is. And, you know, I guess it's all about feedback, isn't it? You know, you do something, you go, oh, my grocery bill is really high. Why is that? Oh, okay, these things are costing a bit too much. And maybe you have to go back to the supermarket, or maybe you can find alternatives, or maybe, you know, and then you kind of figure out, kind of brainstorm what would be easiest and, you know, more sustainable for you.
You've given us so much advice, so many tips. My last question was going to be, what advice do you have for others? Is there anything you want to add, or do you want to summarize the advice that you've given us so far to leave people with?
I guess I'd just say start small. I think it's really easy with all of this kind of sustainability stuff to just want to go in head first and, you know, be more sustainable, or be plastic free, or quit the supermarket. And, you know, they're the stories that we always hear about because they sound so kind of dramatic, but most people don't change like that. Most people change by deciding that they're going to get a local milkman to deliver their milk, and then going to the bakery, and then discovering they can grow tomatoes, and then kind of slowly. So actually the best thing to do is, if you want to change, figure out what the aspiration is, but then figure out what are the habits that you can do. Like, what are the individual habits, and maybe just up to 3, 1, 2, or 3 habits. So find a solution for milk, find a solution for bread, find a solution for avocados, or maybe that's not appropriate in Italy, olives, and then, from there, like the next thing. But I think too many people kind of go in, rush into it. It's like the lady with the cheese, she decided to buy everything plastic free, and then all of a sudden her grocery bill's enormous, and then she's like, this is ridiculous, it's really expensive, and then she quits. Whereas if you're just doing one thing at a time,
that's true of every habit. It's the same, isn't it? They always say don't go 100% because you'll be demotivated and then you'll swing back to the other way. Whereas if you take it step by step, the change happens and you don't even see it. It kind of just, you grow.
Yes,
it's wonderful advice.
I'm sure there's a saying that says that you underestimate. What is it? You overestimate what you can achieve in 1 year, and you underestimate what you can achieve in 5. And it is true. Like when you look back at where you were a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, whatever, you go, oh, I've done so much. But in the moment, you're like, oh,
yes.
So, and it's really interesting. So, you just need to kind of give yourself a break, I think, and just not expect it all to happen. And any of these kind of 30 days to zero waste, plastic free, quitting the supermarket, that's just an Instagram tagline, like actually it's going to take you longer, but if you build sustainable habits, that's what's going to keep you going. Whereas if you do it all in 30 days, you're probably going to burn out on day 31 and feel resentful and go to the supermarket and buy a bag of lollies because, whatever. So you've got to make it sustainable for you.
Really good advice. Thank you. Can you let us know where people can find you online if they don't know who you are and where you live in the virtual world? Can you let us know?
Sure. So I have a website called treadingmyownpath.com. And I also have Facebook and Instagram and all of those things. And I've also written a book, actually, which is called The Less Waste, No Fuss Kitchen. And it is actually translated in Italian. You can get it in Italian and Spanish. And basically, it's kind of looking at the kitchen, and it's looking at reducing plastic and packaging, reducing carbon footprints, and reducing food waste without losing your mind. So it's kind of that thing of, we can't all do everything. It's very hard. But what are the things that we can maybe do? Or how do we prioritize, and what's better, and all of that sort of thing. I can't remember what it's called in Italian. I'll have to look it up. But
most of our,
it's called The Less Waste, No Fuss Kitchen.
Most of our listeners are in the States and in the UK and also in Australia. We do have some listeners in Europe. But what I'll do is I'll link to the book in the show notes, and I'll look for the translated copy as well. So we'll have both on there, and people can click if they want to go and have a look at it and get hold of a copy. Thank you ever so much for your time, Lindsay.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's been wonderful to talk to you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.